Hello, so it's Tuesday and here's my studio check-in. I have some beautiful things to share and a check-in to leave you with for this week. Um, so this morning I woke up coming off of a weekend that was really kind of a working weekend for me. A lot of computer time, a lot of communication, energy. So I was feeling and managing in multiple projects with that. So I was feeling very in my head, so very kind of buzzy and stimulated in that way, very much in my headspace, in my mind, in my thoughts, and that type of energy. And so I want to be in my studio today. And I did want to be in my studio today, but I wasn't in my body, and so I wasn't feeling it fully. And so when that happens for me, my I need to check in with my body and ask it what it needs. And what I often need is to feel emotion somehow, to really kind of drop back in. So I go on walks. So I took a long walk to start studio day today, a different way of coming to my creative practice. And also just as important as putting paint on the brush and on the canvas and what have you. So went on a walk with my dog. We took some photos, slowed down, listened to the sounds, really got back into my senses and my feet. And then came back, had a nice breakfast, and came into the studio. And I really realized on the walk how great it felt to be physically active at a mellow pace, and in that response and in that feeling, how much I needed to stay at that mellow pace in the studio today. So sometimes I feel real energetic, other times there's this mellow energy, and that is what's going to nourish me from the practice. And within that, you can still get things done in your creative practice. So I moved a little slower today as far as product and outcome goes. I worked on creating backgrounds for some paintings, which doesn't take a whole lot of headspace, a lot of thought. It's just real free and spontaneous, intuitive. I did shoot some photographs of some work. And then after the slowdown had started to sink in and I kicked off my shoes and I'd been listening to some audio readings, which also helps slow me down if it's the right person. Then I wanted to write at that point, and I hadn't really done a whole lot of writing since last week. So I pulled out my journal, and a lot of my practice today looked like writing. And it's super important for me personally that when I'm way up in my headspace, I often want to write. Like I want to stop everything and just purge in my journal, because I'm a writer by nature and by heart. I've done it my whole life. But that's not always the best time for me to actually start the writing when I'm up here, because I'm going to stay up here and it's going to keep that feeling and that energy happening. So I need to take the time to drop from here into my heart space, right? And then ideally, what works best for me is to then let that intuitive heart space move into more of a creative and visual work. And then once I find some flow and the right pace at that time with that, then the urge to write comes back in. But when I sit down to the page and pen, the words are coming from that intuitive knowing. So the knowing underneath the thoughts. And then I start to write from a place that really starts to show me what I'm processing right now in my creative practice and service. So that's how it looked for me today in the studio. A slower time, and also very energizing in the right ways. So I wonder how it looks for you when you're feeling a little in your headspace and a little bit, jittery. So one of the things that came up in my writing that I think is important for all of us too, and is comparison, right? So we all deal with comparison on different levels with the creative practice. And of course, there's the obvious one, which we always talk about, which is comparing ourselves to others or comparing our artwork to the artwork of others. But what I was noticing today was some thoughts about comparison to ourselves even. So when we come to one session or one practice or a new art journal spread or a new painting, and the one we had previously was really good and we were really in the flow, and what came out of it just felt really great. And then we come into this next one, if we're not really paying attention to where we're at in our headspace or our heart space, we sometimes come in with those expectations to try to get to that space again. And so I really was noticing today how delightfully important it is to kind of bring ourselves back to going in with an empty mind into each creative practice session, whether it be writing or visual or your music or dance, whatever you do. So really dropping into your intuitive heart in that present moment and trusting the place in you that knows what's best for you for that practice of that day. So if it looks like not getting to the paint for a couple of hours because you need to go be outside and walk in the woods or by the river or by the ocean, then follow that knowing, follow that wisdom in you. That's your healer in you speaking to you. And your healer is an artist, and the artist in you is a healer. It's really beautiful, the way that they work holistically to get you to do what you need. And then the other thing I got to thinking about today, or what I noticed in my writing rather, that came up was this idea about teachers and who it is that we look to work with. And then also for me, I was reflecting upon what it means to be a facilitator or a guide or a teacher. And I have some strong feelings about it. And I feel that it's super important that we are pointing the way as teachers and guides and facilitators, and that we look for those types of facilitators that are perhaps pointing a way as well, but that aren't necessarily saying this is the way, right? We all feel this truth, this intuitive truth, I think, about looking for who's going to guide us. And so look for the people that point the way, but what they really want is for you to find your way within that. At least I know that's what I aspire to personally as a guide and facilitator, and I like to keep coming back to that vision. So what is the chemistry between you and whoever you may be working with in a program? What does your intuitive heart tell you? Follow what it is that works for you and leave behind what doesn't. And I know for me, a super important part is finding someone to work with, to teach me, to learn from, that is actively doing, actively experiencing what it is that they're teaching. So, yeah, for me it's a red light if they're teaching something but it's not what they do, it's not what they're thinking about and working within their heart space or their spirituality or what have you. It's got to be something they're involved with as an experiential thing. That's super important in my opinion. So, and then to also recognize too, Ram Dass says this a lot, and I listen to him off and on, that when we go to a teacher or a guide or facilitator and we learn a certain way of doing things, we're learning a method, right? And we're learning the way that they see it. We're learning a little bit about their path, and they're showing us. And it's beautiful. But to recognize that every practice itself and every method is a trap in itself. And of course, the paradox of it is that we have to try the method and actually be in it in order for it to work, in order to experience what it is that they're trying to show us, what it is that they're pointing to on that way. And so you have to do it a little bit, but then you have to go into it with the faith or the trust that this method or this path will eventually kind of dissolve around you, and you won't need it anymore to serve your own practice, and that it will take you beyond what it is. And so, in other words, it will take you to your path. So I hope that translates well. That's how I think about these things. They're wonderful and super important. So while others make suggestions and point the way and do these things, and of course we need to dive in and we need to show up and do them and try them and find our practice, only you know what your intuitive path or spiritual path is, or what your creative practice is going to look like. So use a method. Recognize when it's complete for you, and then move on when it's time. See if you can recognize that in yourself. One of the things also, speaking of Ram Dass, that he asks, that I'm going to leave this as your check-in. Actually, I'm changing my mind on the spot here. So here's the check-in. I heard him say once that and he was telling a story about someone else. It might have even been the Dalai Lama, but that basically we tend to find ourselves in these predicaments, right? That we're are we honoring our truth, or are we honoring the need to look consistent? So when we come to these things, like I said, I'm gonna have studio day every Tuesday, no matter what. I'm going to get up at 9 o'clock or 8 o'clock or whatever, get out to my studio, I'm going to start painting. And that's all it is. I'm just going to paint, sketch, work on my skill, work on my intuitive art, whatever it is. And then not leaving any of that flexibility, which I've told you I personally need. What is that about? And who am I trying to look consistent to? Oftentimes it's to the external. Sometimes it's even to ourselves, to just say, hey, I've stuck to this. But oftentimes we sacrifice our truth in order to look consistent. And so my question for you is to recognize, first of all, that our truths are dynamic and that they change from day to day. So what is your intuitive truth about the practices that you come to? And are you committed to looking consistent? Or are you committed to truly living your intuitive truth and from your intuitive heart? That's a really potent question. And it tends to lead me back to my own center when I remember to come to that particular prompt or question or check-in. And it's one that we'll be working with in Relate, which is something that I'm working on quite a bit right now in the studio too. Is reformatting some of that content. Relate is all about how we relate to self and others and the world, and finding out what our truth is and living from that space, taking actionable steps in life and engagement that honor our personal intuitive hearts and truth. So may you feel closer to your intuition this week, and thank you for listening.